So, Marvel has had a rough year with some of the most divisive and disappointing films in a phase. Not only that, but it's also the longest phase with about 18 projects that occurred in only 2 years. From a silly I Am Groot special to a long, grueling epic about how we process Greek with Wakanda Forever, there were a lot of diverse projects. So, let's rank them. But if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe and follow my social media to stay updated with my content. Alright, let's get into it. Oh, and forewarning, I am going to be spoiling mostly everything I talk about here. At number 18, I Am Groot. A series where you get to watch Groot take a bath. Yeah, I'm not sure how this got made. At number 17, What If? An anthology show that is pretty unambitious with its alternate realities. It was highly disappointing to see how low stakes and uncreative these alternate ideas were. It's a show with endless opportunities that feels so restrained and limited with where it can go. It has a few episodes like Evil Doctor Strange, the Avengers episode, and Ultron, but other than that, it's pretty forgettable. At number 16, She-Hulk, a lawyer, procedural sitcom with action, cameos, a seemingly structured narrative with themes of sexism, a commentary on modern society, and how women navigate it, modern dating, and extreme fourth wall breaking with critiques of the MCU. If that sounds like a lot, that's because this show has no idea what it wants to be, so it chooses to be all of that. Never have I seen a show just throw everything at it and have no focus.
None of these storylines make any sense.
Nor have I seen a show self-own itself by breaking the fourth wall to tell the viewers that everything we've seen so far makes no sense. Every time the show tried to seem smarter than it is, the flaws creaked in even more. But hey, at least Daredevil was done pretty well. At number 15, Black Widow, a spy movie that started out pretty well in its first act but stumbled the rest of the way. They adapted one of the coolest villains, Taskmaster, unbelievably poorly, and the whole movie felt like a delivery that arrived way too late. At number 14, WandaVision, a really unique show that I adored so much for most of its season, but got completely ruined by its finale. Normally I don't dictate an entire show's quality based on its ending, but since it was a show entirely reliant on a payoff, the ending really mattered, and unfortunately it greatly stumbled. At number 13, Thor: Love and Thunder, a movie made by one of my favorite modern directors, Taika Waititi, following one of my favorite MCU movies should have been a recipe for success. Unfortunately, it stumbled in almost every way possible to bad CGI, green screen, pacing, and overuse of comedy, incoherent character arcs, and an unbelievable waste of a villain played by one of the most talented actors on the planet. Love and Thunder had so much promise, especially since it was delving into the Jane Foster cancer storyline. I thought it would be an emotional roller coaster more in vein of Jojo Rabbit, but unfortunately it was just a major disappointment. The reason it's not lower despite all that is because the movie is entertaining enough, with some nice action sequences and some emotional beats hitting, and the pace of the movie is structured so that there's always something happening, so I was never bored with the movie. It just could and should have been much more than it was. At number 12, Ms. Marvel. This show's first episode is still one of my favorite things in the MCU. Unfortunately, everything I loved about the first episode was not followed up on in any capacity. It started off as a coming-of-age story about a girl learning to drive, trying to start a YouTube channel, trying to figure out what she wants out of life when she gets to college, and trying to simply navigate all these changes in her life whilst remaining close to her family. Not only that, it had some amazing style with this comic book art with immensely high energy, which was simultaneously very charming. Unfortunately, all of this gradually disappears to focus on interdimensional bad guys, freaking time travel, the FBI, ninjas, and mutants? Like, how did that even transpire in making a show about Ms. Marvel? Y'all already had it right in the first episode. What happened? At number 11, Shang-Chi, a martial arts movie that delves into the mysterious Ten Rings organization. This movie has some of the most stellar action I've seen in the MCU, and introduces one of the more interesting antagonists as of late with Wenwu. Unfortunately, it's coupled with a pretty simple story, a lead that's not particularly that memorable, and one of the more annoying side characters in recent memory. I get that a lot of people love this movie, so having it this low might be a hot take, but the thing I care most about movies are the emotions I feel and how much I relate to the characters, and those things weren't too big of a focus in this film. At number 10, Hawkeye, a Christmas adventure that's really just an origin about Kate Bishop rather than a story about Hawkeye. It's a pretty fun story with some great Christmas vibes, and Haley Steinfeld just steals the show with how charming and fantastic she is. Unfortunately, characters like Yelena Belova and Echo feel needlessly shoved into the story and don't really add much. Kingpin is also utterly wasted, and I really hate how he was written and shoved into the finale of the show. It had some good moments like this one-take action sequence and the scenes where Clint interacts with his children, but the focus is in too many places to be cohesive. The show was consistent enough to be enjoyable, but I wouldn't really recommend it. At number 9, Moon Knight. This was one of my most anticipated MCU projects in general. I haven't read many comics, but I decided to check out one from Moon Knight just because he seemed like such an enticing character, and he was. Unfortunately, the show doesn't really do the comics justice, which is fine. It's honestly better if it could do its own thing and be good, but it was mostly mediocre. Episodes 1 and 5 are really fantastic though, and some of the best stuff we've gotten in the MCU, which is definitely worth noting. I just wish it was more focused on Mark as a character who's deeply struggling with his dissociative identity disorder, rather than delving into the spirit world, talking hippos, gigantic CGI kaiju monsters, or whatever. It also completely skipped over the final fight and just felt like a big tease by the end of it, which was pretty upsetting. At number 8, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. This was a really charming Christmas adventure starring the Guardians, directed by none other than James Gunn. This was an incredibly refreshing and fun special that really evoked the Christmas spirit. It also took what was an obnoxious pairing with that of Drax and Mantis into a really fun character dynamic. Mantis especially was a really wasted character in the second movie, and I'm glad she's finally getting her due screen time. Really, it just felt like a touching family special. You get this really warm brother-sister moment between Peter and Mantis, and this father-son moment between Peter and Yondu. So the special leaves you with really warm familial moments. I also really liked the Kevin Bacon stuff. That was really funny. It probably could have done more to invest me in its story and hit me more emotionally, but it did what it needed to do, which was to just be a fun time. At number 7, Loki. I had no interest in this show when I first heard about it, cause like, he already died and now he's getting a show? However, Loki turned out to be this really fun, engaging crime noir procedural with themes of existentialism and what it means to be good. The first 2 episodes of this show are amongst my favorite things in the MCU, believe it or not. It's just so good. Unfortunately, the show follows the pattern of all the other shows and gradually decreases in quality as it goes on. By the end of it, it just feels like its main priority was to set up Kang rather than to tell a good story. At number 6, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This is probably the most consistent show in the entirety of Phase 4. It was also the one that reminded me the most of a Marvel Netflix show in the best way. The show is relatively violent and mature, with scenes of John Walker literally caving a dude in with a shield in public. It also delves into topics of racism, police brutality, and corrupt politicians, and we get to see a real struggle for what it means to be Captain America. My favorite stuff though is when we simply get a lot of breathing room and screen time dedicated to our characters just simply doing regular things like going on dates, going to therapy, or worrying about paying bills. Unfortunately, most of that gets sidelined in favor of whatever the heck is going on with the super soldier terrorists. The stuff with Carly Morgenthau is incredibly underdeveloped and uninteresting. John Walker really should have just been the main antagonist, but then he goes from being really unhinged to a pretty good guy in the span between episodes 5 and 6 out of nowhere. The finale was, as usual, very disappointing with the show. All the depth and interesting social commentary completely go out the window, especially with lines where Sam just tells a politician to do better, despite the politician describing a really complex situation with the snap.
And the people who reappeared only to find someone else living in their family home. They just end up homeless. You have no idea how complicated this situation is.
You're right. You've got to do better, Senator.
All Sam has to say is, yeah, that's a you problem, just do better. And the politician is like, oh yeah, you right, my bad bro, I didn't think of that. At number 5, Werewolf by Night. This one was a really nice surprise. I didn't expect much from this, especially since it's directed by Michael Giacchino, who is mainly just a composer. I didn't know anything about this character, but something that immediately drew me was the old black and white aesthetic with film grain to make it look like it was shot on film. I really enjoy the format of these specials a lot, and I really think a lot of these shows should have just been a 1-hour special like this one. Since it's so short, it hardly wastes any time getting into the meat of the plot, which makes for some great pacing. From beginning to end, it's just this thrill ride between these hunters, and you don't really get a lot of wasted time of the character getting into his actual origin story of becoming the werewolf. It was also perfect for the Halloween season, and I just really enjoyed it. The only reason it's not higher is simply that it didn't make me feel all that much emotionally. It's a neat little special, but it didn't do much to really wow me, but that's kinda okay for something of this caliber. At number 4, Eternals. This one might be a bit of a hot take having it this high, but I actually enjoyed it. The reason why it's this high is that it actually feels like a film made by a person with an artistic direction. Chloe Zhao is one of my favorite modern directors, and this really did feel like a Chloe Zhao movie. I felt the slow burn character moments, the beautiful on-location cinematography, and most importantly, it felt so in touch with humanity. It also explores a lot about grief, family, and a lot of moral complexities and philosophies. The action is also really well directed and feels pretty distinct from most of the Marvel movies, which was really cool. I also liked how many main characters died and faced lasting consequences. It made the tension really high, and it really felt like anyone could die at any moment. Now, what didn't work for me is that the movie is a little bit of a slog at times since the runtime is really long. There are also a lot of characters, so naturally not everybody gets something interesting to do, especially in the final battle where one of them literally just leaves for no reason to make room for everyone else. This should have just been a mini-series because it would have had way more time to delve into the flashbacks of the Eternals and give proper development for each one. The story is also pretty messy and doesn't make a whole lot of sense at times, especially when you're trying to connect it to the MCU. Even with all this though, I still like it because at the end of the day, this movie actually made me feel something, which is a lot more than I can say about most of the movies on this list. At number 3, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I was beyond excited about this movie. I love the Doctor Strange character, but what got me really amped up for this was the fact that it was being advertised as the MCU's first horror movie, and I love horror. But also, it was being directed by the one and only Sam Raimi, who hadn't directed a movie since 2013. A new MCU movie being brought by the guy who did the OG Spider-Man and Evil Dead trilogy had me so excited. The trailers were fantastic, the posters were bangers, and Danny Elfman was reunited with Raimi to scores. What could go wrong? Well, the movie was a little bit of a letdown script-wise, unfortunately. It doesn't do anything terribly wrong, it's just a lot plainer than I expected it to be. There's not much complexity with the characters or the plot, it's just kind of a nice 2-hour thrill ride of a superhero movie, and that's it. We do, however, get a lot of really nice cinematography with high energy with the camera movements, eye-popping colors, a fast pace, and it's also the most violent MCU movie, which was a pleasant surprise. I just wish it did a lot more for me emotionally and hit more of a core with me in terms of humanity. It has other cool moments too, such as zombie Doctor Strange, the fight with the demon in the beginning, and the fight where our Strange defeats Evil Strange with musical notes was pretty creative and visually pleasing. I just wish the movie did more for me emotionally and hit more of a core with me in terms of humanity. And it especially doesn't help that Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie that does the multiverse concept way better and has a ton of heart and humanity, came out around the same time. I hope when the third Doctor Strange movie comes out, that it incorporates a lot of those gothic and colorful visuals again. I love what Raimi did here, but I either need the writer gone or for Scott Derrickson to come back because I feel like we've been sorely lacking emotional development with Doctor Strange as of late. Anyway, the movie could have been a lot more than it was, but it was enjoyable. Just thank God this movie had Raimi, otherwise it would have been way lower. At number 2, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Black Panther was not one of my favorite MCU movies, and the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman certainly didn't help in terms of my anticipation for the sequel. However, I turned out to love Wakanda Forever as it turned out to be a pretty deep exploration of grief, death, and vengeance. It has one of my favorite MCU antagonists ever with Namor, who gets so much amazing development and a gritty stylistic approach from Ryan Coogler. Every time he was on screen, I felt such dread. Namor turned into one of the coolest MCU characters very quickly, and I loved his backstory and character arc in the film. Shuri also went through an extremely well-developed character arc. It was shocking as she went from this side character in the MCU to this person who is leading one of the biggest superhero films of all time. It's interesting seeing how Shuri is thrust into this responsibility and world and doesn't have much of a say in the matter. It really iterated this notion of how life is truly unexpected and we just have to play the cards we're dealt with no matter what. Okoye goes through a pretty good character arc too, as she has to persevere despite her failures and find out who she is outside of just being a general of Wakanda. And her action sequence on the bridge against the Atlanteans was really well directed and riveting. The climactic point where Shuri is about to kill Namor was definitely the highlight for me though. I genuinely didn't know who was going to win, as Namor had been pretty unstoppable the rest of the film. I just love this moment where Shuri and Namor realize at the same time the generational trauma they've been through, and the cycle of vengeance they're caught up with won't stop unless they learn to forgive and move on. It oddly reminded me a lot of The Last of Us 2 and how well conveyed the themes of revenge and grief are thoroughly portrayed. The movie is a little long though, and the pacing can suffer at points. And although the movie does deal with a lot of heavy subject matter, I actually didn't feel that emotional from the movie. I did find the ending to be very well done though. I love the silence and the ambient sounds of the waves overtaking the film as we see Shuri break down by herself and finally learn to let go and process her grief. Then the cutaway to Rihanna's masterful song Lift Me Up was also just the icing on top of the cake. The after credits of her meeting the son of T'Challa was also just the most endearing thing ever. I just wish the rest of the runtime could have delivered moments like these throughout its runtime. Queen Ramonda's death should have hit harder for me, as she was pretty much the only thing Shuri had at that point, and she lost her too. I just felt like it was glossed over, and also kind of weird that she's only thinking about her brother in the final moment of the film, and not also her mother too, who just died. But all in all, Wakanda Forever was such a pleasant and much needed win for the MCU. And you guessed it, at number 1 I have Spider-Man No Way Home. As time goes on, I think I learned to appreciate this movie more and more. This movie is basically if a 10-year-old Spider-Man fan could think of a movie by throwing in a bunch of fan service and had no limits and just kind of made a movie, but it actually ended up being coherent. No Way Home is the ultimate Spider-Man movie that wholeheartedly shows the love it has for the character. And it had no reason to be that. All I wanted was for this to be a low-key Spider-Man movie that grapples with his identity crisis. But hey, if you can throw in Doctor Strange, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Matt Murdock, and every villain from all the other Spider-Man movies into this, and still make a sensible follow-up to the previous film, why not? And that's exactly what No Way Home did. It told a compelling story of Peter's guilt of how he ruined the futures of his friends' lives, and how it's his responsibility to help every single person he can, even if they're terrible people. The way they brought the villains back was pretty great too, especially Willem Dafoe, who absolutely steals every scene he's in. Green Goblin is honestly even more terrifying in this movie than he was in Spider-Man 1, which I think is largely due to the fact that they just let Willem Dafoe show his facial expressions without a mask on. But it's also the fight scenes he has in the movie too. The condo scene between Peter and Goblin, man, that was so menacing and intense. Almost every action sequence in this movie is pretty great actually. John Watts really steps up his game in this film with the cool wonders, unique displays of Peter's spider sense, much better cinematography, and exciting action sequences. Although some of the movie CGI can be kind of bad, and you can tell a lot of other shots were rushed, but I don't want to focus on too much of that because the VFX workers are heavily overworked with crunch deadlines, and the movie is pretty good otherwise, despite the fact that some of the CGI could be distracting. I also want to mention that I wish Aunt May had a little more to do. She was pretty underdeveloped in this trilogy, which makes this scene hit less, although the death scene is still pretty great for what it is. Another notable mention is that they actually were able to give compelling character arcs to Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. Surprisingly, Andrew's Spider-Man gets a decent amount to do and steals a lot of the scenes he's in, which really reaffirms that he's my favorite actor to play Spider-Man. Tobey is as great as ever, but I honestly could have just used more scenes akin to him interacting with Doc Ock and just doing more. It's cool that he's able to stop Tom Spidey from going down a dark path, but I just wish he had a tad more to do. My boy Matt Murdock has a pretty great cameo too. I felt like they were able to say a good amount about him in such a short amount of time. He also has a pretty fun scene between him and Happy in the extended cut, and to be honest, I like the more fun edition more because it paces the first act better than the original in my opinion. And the way the movie leaves Peter is my favorite part. Finally, a heartbreaking and depressing circumstance for Peter where he has to deal with all the repercussions of his actions in the worst way possible, but still finding a way to persevere. I love the scene between him and MJ in the cafe. It just feels so heartbreaking, heroic, and warm at the same time. It's heavily complemented by the score by Giacchino. I love the score throughout the movie, but it just especially hits hard in this scene. I love that we finally leave the character in his more traditional space of him being broke and working on his own, and I'm just so excited about the possibilities of the character going forward. Fingers crossed Sony and Marvel don't screw it up. Anyway, that's my Phase 4 ranking. What do you guys think of my list? And what are your lists? I'd love to know in the comments below. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.